So you want to buy a ball python? What's up, YouTube? So this video is going to be strictly for people that are looking to buy a ball python as their first ball python or as their first pet or whatever. And I just want to talk about 5 things that you need to know before you buy a ball python and 5 things you need to do often when you have a ball python. Now, this is an inchy pastel ivory. This is one of the whitest snakes you can find. Wider than this would probably be a bell. So if you can find a bell, there are different shades of bell depending on the morphs, but that's besides the point. This video is strictly for you wanting to get a ball python as a pet. So with that said, let's go and get right into the 5 things. I'm going to try to keep each item to at least a minute or less. That way that I don't make this video a long video. So there's 5 things again that you should know before you get a ball python and 5 things you should do as you keep a ball python. So number 1, depending on the type of ball python that you're buying, whether it be an adult or a baby or whatever it is, you will need to determine, is it handleable? And what that really means is, with a baby, it's not so much is it handleable. With a baby, you can actually get a baby that doesn't necessarily want to be held, and after a few times of you handling it, you're going to be okay. But there are adults out there that doesn't like to be handled because they haven't been handled very often, or maybe they just never liked being handled to begin with, so the person that had them before never handled them. So this girl here, I like to get her out whenever I show people my snakes, and it's mainly because she loves being handled. She likes the attention. I have a lot of snakes that like the attention and a lot of snakes that could do without. So you have to understand that some snakes like to be handled and some snakes do not need to be handled or do not like to be handled. And you need to figure that out, because before you buy a snake, you need to determine, am I going to be able to handle this snake, or is it going to be a snake that I keep inside of an enclosure at all times? So with that said, let's go into the next point with it, which is housing. So I talk about enclosures. That's one way that people house ball pythons. People house ball pythons in 40-gallon enclosures or bigger, and that is going to be for most of the life of the ball python. If you get a ball python that grows pretty massive, I have some ball pythons here that are probably like 5 feet or so. A 40-gallon tank is not going to work as well, mainly because if you have them in a tank, they're probably going to try to venture off, and you have only one snake, so you're not going to worry about that stuff. Where are you going? She's trying to leave me, and you're not going to worry about that stuff. So if you have a snake that grows that big, most female ball pythons will grow that big. You will need to determine if you, come on, you can't go in the rack. She's trying to go in the rack. I'm just going to put her back because she's trying to leave me now. So with housing, you have to understand that some snakes are going to get too big for that 40 gallon, so you might need to go bigger. So I've seen people keep them in a 4 foot long, 2 feet deep, 12 inches tall. I've seen people keep them in a 4 foot long, 2 feet deep, 18 inches tall, 24 inches tall. It really just depends on what you want and what you need. But at a minimum, I would go, if you get a big old snake like that, I promise you, a 4 foot by 2 feet by 12 inches is the minimum. And then after that, you can go as high as you want. Now, as far as height, you don't need nothing too high, because most ball pythons, while they do climb and do check out their environment, most ball pythons are going to stay hidden in their hide as often as they can. And they will come out at night, because that's usually when they're most active. Now, as far as activity level, that is another thing we are going to talk about. You need to understand that ball pythons are not that active. So this is the 3rd point. The 3rd point being activity of ball pythons being not so much. Ball pythons will stay in their hide often. Obviously, you saw me get her out. She was enjoying it for a little bit, and then after a while, she was like, I need to go back, and she was trying to go back in the rack. So they all have their own different personalities, which brings me on to the 4th thing you need to know before you get a ball python. Ball pythons all have different personalities, and you need to understand that, because if you get a ball python and you're hoping that it's friendly and you're hoping that all this is going to happen, you might be in for a surprise, because that ball python that you got might not be so friendly, might not like to be held, and might not like to come out of its enclosure. And this goes for all types of animals. All types of animals have different personalities and such, so you need to understand that. The last thing I want to talk about ball pythons is feeding. So when you feed a ball python, it's based off the size of the ball python, based off the weight of the ball python. So some people want to do about 10% of the body weight of the snake as a feeder. Now, with that said, you also need to find a feeder supplier that works for you. So do you want to feed African soft furs? Do you want to feed regular rats? Do you want to feed frozen? Do you want to feed fresh killed? Do you want to feed live? All of those questions will determine where your supplier is going to come from. You may be able to get something online and get it shipped to you. You may have to find somebody local that has those live feeders, and that way, now before you get your snake, you know exactly where you're going to get your feeders from. So now the things you need to know as you have a ball python. So what do you need to do on the as often as possible? Some of this stuff does have a time frame. Some of this stuff doesn't have a time frame necessarily, mainly because there are things that you're not going to have to do so often. So the first thing I want to talk about is going back to the feeder stuff. The first thing you should know about ball pythons when you do feed them is that they should not be handled for a few days after you feed them. Sometimes when you handle a ball python too early after feeding them, they will regurgitate their food, which also puts stress on the snake. So just wait 2 or 3 days before you handle your snake after you have fed them. The next thing I want to talk about is handling. So obviously I just said don't handle your snake, but now I'm talking about handling your snake if you are afraid of the fact that they're going to get aggressive or something like that. So this mainly starts off with baby ball pythons. As I mentioned, some baby ball pythons may act like they don't want to be held, and all they need is reassurance that you're not going to hurt them. So the more you handle a snake, the more likely they're going to get used to you handling them, and the less likely they're going to get aggressive when you handle the snakes. I have a snake that every time I grab her, she hisses at me, but she doesn't care after the fact. She hisses at me mostly to say, don't touch me. And then I grab her and she's like, all right, whatever, do what you need to do. And that's kind of how she goes. That's how her personality is. So that's just adding towards that handleability that I mentioned earlier on as well. So I'm just piggybacking off some of the things that I already talked about. Other things that you need to do, and this is mainly talking about weekly basis. So if your snake poops or if it expels urate or anything like that, depending on the severity of this poop, sometimes they're real solid and sometimes they're not. If they're real solid, you can easily spot clean your ball python enclosure. So spot cleaning is just picking up where the poop was and all the surrounding substrate, throwing it away, and you don't necessarily have to do any wipe downs unless you see that it's stained the enclosure. The other thing is, if you have a ball python that for some reason maybe you just got them and they haven't really adjusted to their environment and they pooped all over the place and it was just nasty, not solid at all, in that case you may have to do a deep clean, take all the substrate out and deep clean it as well as you can. Most people use the veterinary disinfectant, which is F10. You can find that on Amazon, but it really just depends. There are some non-toxic, non-alcohol based disinfectant sprays and disinfectant wipes out there that will work just as well. So you just got to find what works for you and what is available for you. So with that said, everything that I've mentioned, I kind of want to tie it into the last 2 things I want to add on the 5 things you need to do as you have a ball python. So number 4 being, make sure that you are understanding your snake. Now, really what that means is, because every snake has a different personality, you have to understand, is your snake going to want you to show it off to people? Is your snake going to want you to handle it every day? Obviously, there are snakes out there that would prefer being out with their owner and hanging out, and then just whenever you put it back, it goes back and hides. So there are people out there that have their snakes out practically several hours a day, and they have no issues. Now, there's also people out there that when they get their snake out, their snake will tell you, hey, I want to go back in. I don't want to be out here anymore. Whether it be a hiss, whether they're trying to actually go back to their home, you will know based off of what the snake is doing. But this is not going to come to you like within the first day. This is going to come to you with experience. You'll have to understand your snake's personality. You'll have to understand your snake's actions and what they mean. So just like any animal out there, you have to understand the animal before you can actually take care of it 100%. And the last thing, which is tying back into number 4, number 5 is going to be finding a group that works for you. And what that means is join a community of ball python keepers that know what it is that personality trait means, or what it is that action means, or maybe as far as illnesses or anything like that, because there are illnesses, there's respiratory infections and stuff like that can happen with snakes, and you need to understand how to treat it. You need to understand what to look for to make sure that they do or do not have it. You need to make sure that you find someone that's knowledgeable enough that can help you out before you need that emergency vet visit. And with that said, just to tie into the last thing, also try to find a vet that will treat reptiles near you. Now, there are vets out there that treat birds, and they will say they can treat reptiles too. And in my opinion, I've tried one of these vets before, and the information that I got was not great. I, in my opinion, thought that I knew more about my reptiles problem than they did, and it didn't really put a good taste in my mouth. So I don't trust avian veterinary services, because I just they think they know enough about reptiles because they're so similar, but they don't know enough to actually make it work for me. So maybe it works for you, maybe it works that they also know enough about reptiles, but in my expertise, in my experience, I haven't found a bird vet that works for me because they don't know enough about reptiles. As always, I appreciate you watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything that I put out in the future. And as always, peace.